In a small African town, where the air was always filled with the smell of roasting maize, red dust clung to the feet of children, and secrets were buried deep in the village well, lived a 15-year-old boy named Taye. Taye was not like most boys his age. He was curious, clever, and stubborn in a way that often worried his mother. His mind was full of questions, his heart full of restlessness. And at the center of it all was the one question his mother never wanted to answer. Who was his father? The people of the town knew Grace, Taye's mother, as a strong and hard-working woman. She raised her son alone, running a small stall in a market where she sold beans, groundnuts, and sometimes mangoes. She smiled easily with neighbors, but when it came to matters of her son's father, her eyes hardened like stone. One warm evening, as the sun sank low and the shadows stretched long across the narrow paths, Taye walked beside his mother, carrying the basket of groceries from the market. His hand slipped into hers, small but firm. He took a deep breath, the words heavy on his lips. "Mama, please, just tell me, who is my father?" Grace didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed fixed on the path ahead, her voice flat but firm. "Taye, I told you before. Your father is gone. He left. That's all you need to know." But Taye knew there was more. He had seen the flicker of pain in her eyes, the way her lips tightened whenever he asked. He had seen neighbors whisper behind their hands when he walked by, their laughter turning into uncomfortable silence. There was a truth buried in this town, and everyone seemed to know it except him. That night, after supper, Taye lay awake on his thin mattress. The moonlight spilled through cracks of the mud walls, painting faint silver lines on the floor. Crickets chirped outside, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. But Taye couldn't sleep. He replayed his mother's words again and again. He left. That's all you need to know. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. His chest tightened with frustration, and he whispered to himself, almost like a vow, "If Mama won't tell me, then I'll find it myself." The weight of not knowing gnawed at him like hunger. How could he understand who he was if he didn't even know half of where he came from? At dawn the next morning, the town was just beginning to stir. Women swept their yards, goats bleated in their pens, and smoke rose lazily from cooking fires. Taye walked quietly, his bare feet dusting the red earth, until he reached a huge mango tree at the edge of the village. Under its wide shade sat the elders, Grandpa Gilo, Grandpa Nuru, and Uncle Shomari, playing a local board game. Their laughter rang out until they spotted Taye. At once, the air changed. Their voices lowered, their eyes slid away. "Good morning, Grandpa Gilo, Grandpa Nuru, Uncle Shomari," Taye greeted politely, lowering himself onto a small rock nearby. The old men returned his greeting, but unease lingered. "I wanted to ask about my father," Taye said quietly, his hands fidgeting. "Do you know him?" The men exchanged uneasy glances. One scratched his head. Another leaned closer to the game as if the little wooden seeds suddenly held great importance. "Ah, boy," Uncle Shomari muttered. "Why dig up old bones? Some things are better left buried." But Taye pressed on. "Please, Uncle, I just want to know who he is. Did he die? Did he go far away?" Grandpa Gilo finally sighed, his weathered face softening with something like pity. He set aside his walking stick. "Ah, Taye, you look just like him. Same eyes, same stubbornness. Even the way you stand reminds me of him." Taye's heart pounded. "So you do know him. Please, Grandpa Gilo, tell me. Who is he?" But Gilo shook his head. "Your mama has her reasons for keeping quiet. But listen well, boy, your father lives close. Closer than you think. But he is complicated." Taye leaned forward, desperation in his eyes. "Close? How close? What do you mean, complicated? Is he dangerous? Does he not want me?" The old man's voice hardened. "Enough, boy. I've said too much. Go home before you cause trouble." But Taye had heard enough to light a fire inside him, closer than you think. From that day, Taye became a detective in his own village. He watched every man closely, studying faces, voices, even laughter. At the blacksmith shop, he stared at the man's strong arms, wondering if they resembled his own. At the market, he studied the shopkeeper's wide smile. On the road, He eyed the delivery man pedaling past, his cap low over his face. Every man became a suspect. Every gesture a clue. But at home, his frustration boiled over. One evening, he sat across from his mother at dinner, silent as she served beans. She noticed his gloom. "Taye, why aren't you eating?" "What's wrong?" she asked softly. His voice came out cold. "Do you know what it's like to walk through town and wonder if every man you see might be your father?" Grace froze, her spoon in midair. "Taye, let it go." "I can't let it go," he burst out, slamming his hand on the table. "Why won't you just tell me the truth? Do you know how it feels to not even know half of who you are?" Her silence screamed louder than anger. Taye pushed away his plate and stormed outside, tears stinging his eyes. The next day, as Taye wandered through the crowded market, he heard two women whispering by a stall. "Have you noticed how often that delivery man visits Grace's house lately?" One murmured, "Grace and her secrets." The other chuckled, "She hides them well, but not forever." Taye froze. His heart raced. He crouched behind a pile of yams, peeking through the gaps. And there he saw him, the delivery man, David, riding past on his bicycle, whistling casually, a messenger bag slung across his chest. Taye felt something stir deep inside, a strange connection he couldn't explain. "The delivery man," he whispered. What Taye didn't know was that the delivery man was his father. David had been watching from afar for years. He had seen his son grow from a playful toddler into a thoughtful teenager, always in shadows, never close enough to speak. At night, David sat alone in the dim room with nothing but a rickety chair, a worn table, and an old photograph. In it, Grace held baby Taye, smiling in the sun. David would hold him to his chest, whispering, "My boy, I miss your first steps, your first words. And now you're almost a man, and you don't even know my face." His heart carried guilt heavier than stone. He remembered that night years ago when Grace, holding baby Taye, had shouted, "If you leave tonight, don't you ever come back." And he had left, pride and secrets tearing them apart. But now, seeing his son searching, hearing whispers in the town, David could no longer stay away. He devised a plan. If he returned as a father, Taye might reject him. So he chose another way. He would come as a stranger, a delivery man, ordinary, invisible. David stitched an old uniform, polished his bicycle, and filled his bag with packages, some real, some staged. He practiced in front of a mirror. "Hello there, young man." You remind me of someone." He stopped, shaking his head. "Too obvious. Keep it casual. You're just a delivery man. First, you earn his trust. Then, when the time is right, you tell him everything. But fear not at him. What if he hates me? What if he says, 'You're not my father, you're just a liar'?" Still, at dawn, David set out with his bicycle, the photograph tucked close to his heart. On an ordinary afternoon, the sound of a bicycle bell rang at Grace's door. Taye opened it and found the delivery man, tall, weary from his ride, but with a strange familiarity in his eyes. "Delivery for Mrs. Grace," he said with forced cheer. Taye blinked, unsettled. Grace arrived and froze, her hands trembling. "You," she whispered, her voice trembling with anger and fear. David forced a polite smile. "Just doing my job, Grace. Nothing more." But Taye saw the tension, the way his mother shook, the way the stranger's eyes softened when they met his. Suspicion deepened. The days that followed were strange ones. Every morning, the sound of a bicycle bell echoed down the dusty lane. Neighbors began to notice how often the delivery man stopped by Grace's house. Sometimes he brought actual parcels, soap, flour, or kerosene. Other times, his bag seemed suspiciously light, as though carrying only air and secrets. For Taye, curiosity burned like fire. He started hovering at the door whenever the man came, and each time he studied his face, the lines of age, the tired eyes that somehow sparkled when they met his. One afternoon, as the man handed over a small package, Taye blurted out, "What's your name?" The man hesitated. He hadn't prepared for that. David. People just call me David." "David. Taye repeated, testing the name on his tongue. Then, boldly, "You seem familiar, like I've seen you before." David's chest tightened, but he forced a laugh. "Ah, I have one of those faces. Ordinary. Easy to forget." But Taye didn't believe that. Something deep inside whispered otherwise. That evening, after Taye had gone to bed, Grace stood outside her house under the moonlight. She didn't hear him arrive, but suddenly David was there, standing by his bicycle, hat in hand. "Grace," he said softly. She stiffened, her jaw tight. "You shouldn't be here." "I had to see him," David whispered. "Our boy. He's grown so much." "Don't call him that," she snapped, her voice sharp as a whip. "You left us, David. You don't get to appear years later and play father." His shoulders sagged, shame heavy on his face. "I know I failed. I know I broke everything. But Grace, I can't stay away anymore." Her eyes glistened, though her voice stayed hard. "If he finds out on his own, fine. But if you tell him before he's ready, before I'm ready, you'll only hurt him more. Do you hear me?" David nodded slowly, though his heart screamed otherwise. He mounted his bicycle and rode into the shadows. Behind the curtain, Taye had watched it all. His suspicions deepened. Days turned into weeks, and David kept coming, sometimes with packages, sometimes with excuses. But slowly, carefully, he wove himself into Taye's world. He helped fix Taye's broken slingshot. He showed him how to balance better on his old bicycle. Once, when Taye's classmates mocked him for not having a father, David happened to overhear. Later, he found Taye sulking under a tree. "You know," David said gently, settling down beside him, "a father is not just a man who gives you his name. Sometimes it's the one who shows up when you need him most." Taye looked at him strangely. "Why do you say things like that? You talk as if you know what it means." David smiled, though his throat ached with unspoken truth. "Maybe I just see myself in you." One night, restless and unable to sleep, Taye rummaged through his mother's old trunk. Inside, hidden under layers of clothes, he found an envelope. His heart raced as he pulled out a faded photograph. It was his mother, younger, brighter, holding a baby in her arms. And beside her stood a tall man, smiling proudly, one arm draped around her shoulders. Taye's breath caught. The face was unmistakable. The same tired eyes, the same warm smile. The delivery man. He clutched the photo to his chest, anger and relief swirling in him like a storm. "Why didn't she tell me?" he whispered fiercely. At dawn, he placed the photograph on the breakfast table. When Grace entered, her hands full of cassava flour, she froze. Her eyes widened, her face drained of color. "Mama," Taye said, his voice trembling but firm. "Is this him? Is David my father?" The silence was deafening. Only the sound of a distant rooster filled the air. Finally, Grace sank into a chair, tears pooling in her eyes. "Yes, Taye, he is your father. Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked with hurt. "Because he left us," she whispered. "Because I didn't want you growing up with a father who couldn't stay. I wanted you to hate no one. I wanted you to grow strong without his shadow. But I have the right to know." Taye shouted, tears streaming. "All these years, I thought I wasn't enough. I thought I was a problem." Grace reached for him, but he pulled away. His world was spinning. That evening, the sky mirrored Taye's heart. Dark clouds, heavy winds, a storm waiting to break. He stood at the gate, the photograph clenched in his hand, as David approached on his bicycle. When their eyes met, Taye's voice shook with fury. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you lie?" David froze, his heart thudding. He saw the photo in Taye's hand and knew the truth was out. "I wanted to," David whispered. "Every day I wanted to, but I was afraid. Afraid you'd hate me. Afraid you'd look at me and see only a coward." Taye's fist trembled. "You left me. You left Mama. Do you know what that felt like?" David's voice cracked. "Yes, I know. And I've carried that guilt every single day. I saw your first school, your first fight, your first football game, from afar. I never stopped watching. I never stopped loving you. I just didn't know how to come back." Tears blurred Taye's vision. The storm broke. For a long moment, silence hung between them. Then slowly, painfully, Taye stepped forward. "Do you promise you won't leave again?" he asked in a whisper. David's tears fell freely now. He knelt down, his voice breaking. "I swear on my life, Taye, never again. If you'll have me, I'll be here, not as a stranger, not as a shadow, but as your father." Taye hesitated, his chest heaving with sobs. And then, finally, he fell into David's arms. Father and son wept into each other's shoulders, years of distance dissolving in that one embrace. From the window, Grace watched silently, her own tears falling. She had guarded her son's heart for years, but now she saw that no wall could stop the truth from breaking through. The days that followed were not perfect. There were still questions, still wounds. But now there was also hope. David started coming not as a delivery man, but as a father. He helped Taye with homework, fixed things around the house, and sometimes just sat with him under the mango tree, sharing stories of his youth. Grace remained cautious, but slowly, cautiously, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, people could change. The whispers in the town did not matter anymore. For in that small house, something long broken was beginning to heal. And so, the boy who had searched for his father finally found him, not in the whispers of neighbors, not in the shadows of secrets, but in the courage to face the truth. For Taye, the question that haunted his childhood had finally been answered, and though the road ahead was uncertain, he now knew one thing for sure. He was no longer alone.